Good afternoon, everyone. So wonderful to see so many of you here. This is the second to last VANTEC meeting before we break for the summer holidays. And it's a life science health tech theme. And it's so great to see so many of you so interested in this sector. We've got a real treat. We've got some experts talking today. And to kick things off, I'd like to introduce Lesley Esford, CEO of SFU VentureLabs. And here's Lesley.
Hello, everybody. This is a really difficult topic to talk about in 20 minutes. Why, artificial intelligence, the future of artificial intelligence and machine learning and life sciences, but I'm going to try to give the high level trends and what's kind of driving the growth in this space and where the opportunities are in this space. So next slide. So before I talk about that, I want to just look at investment trends that have been happening over the last few years. And so certainly we know on a global level that the rising inflation rates, interest rates increasing, obviously geopolitical risk, declining customer sentiment are all driving changes in investment. And I think there's also what we'll see is that there are peaks in investment in 2021 that were driven by other things as well. And I'm sure you can all guess. So if we look at the next slide, where obviously what you're seeing is for global life sciences and digital health trends, you saw a major increase in 2021. I think we can all understand that life sciences was the favorite at that point, but if you look at other sectors, you also saw a growth stage at this point where you saw major mega deals, high valuations, IPOs being set at that particular point. And then I think there was a correction. There were a lot of things that where the valuations were off. And so when you look at it, although we think that there is no money in the marketplace, it's actually just gone back to pre-COVID times. And so next slide. Where again, if you look at the average deal size in 2021, you're looking at incredibly large deals. But if you look at the median deal size, it really hasn't changed. So it's just those mega deals that you're actually seeing, and as well as the opportunity to invest. So next slide. So the interesting element of where we are right now as the global deal side trends are shifting, the other shift is so in 2023, it goes to much earlier. So they're looking at early stage opportunities. And there's a lot of questions to why that is the case, and no one really knows. But if you think about life sciences in particular, I would say that there are many companies that during COVID struggled. And if you weren't doing things in COVID to directly, whether you're developing therapeutics or diagnostics or doing something in that space, you had tremendous trouble with supply chain issues. So I think that a lot of things slowed down. And so the question is whether there are enough really good opportunities that are past the early stage. So it's why this is the factor. It just happens that it is, and there is a shift. So now I want to go to the next slide and really talk about the opportunities in with artificial intelligence and machine learning in life sciences. And this was, and I'm going to break it down into two sides. I'm going to talk about, kind of the drug development device side, and then I'm going to talk about healthcare, the healthcare sector, because they're a little bit different in where the opportunities are, and also to the adoption of this technology. So this survey was done by Deloitte in 2020, and they were asking, how are you using artificial intelligence right now, machine learning, and how do you see yourself looking at it in the future? And this was among the survey respondents. You're talking about 44% successfully used AI to improve process efficiencies. 28% were using AI to enhance existing products, and 27% were using AI in the development of new products and services. And obviously, I would say that if you looked at this right now, there's some things that probably hold true, but there's also other opportunities that emerged. So next slide. So really, when we talk about drug development, it is expected to have a measurable impact on a few things. First, the drug development, clinical trials, which hasn't really evolved for a long period of time and was really pressured to evolve during COVID. Because all of a sudden it was very difficult to get clinical trials to move forward. You couldn't bring people into the hospital. You had to look at other ways to both recruit and actually also monitor those patients as well. Because you didn't necessarily want a sick population coming to the hospital, nor did they want to be coming to the hospital. So clinical trials is an area. Supply chain, we all experience, you could go across sectors, that this is actually something that is an area. And the commercial and regulatory processes as well. It'll be quite interesting in that last one to also, this is where I would actually, I'm not about to talk about ChatGPT at this point, but that in particular is an area where those documents are incredibly difficult to write. However, having the ability to use a system that can expedite that would really take a lot of burden off this industry. Because when you're developing documents for clinical trial or when a product goes onto the market, there are a lot of compliance issues. So why are we looking at this? Is mainly to develop treatments faster, to have them more efficiently and into there, reducing the cost of healthcare, and well, also accessibility to patients is something that you want to have it. So if you can reduce the costs, also reduce the time to getting it through to commercialization, you can actually make it more accessible. And a lot of things that are driving this in drug development is, one, there's a patent cliff, so that many of the large pharma are facing the fact that they're going to lose a lot of revenue. There's also pressure from governments to reduce the cost of drugs. So again, their revenue potential is also struggling as well. And there is a rising cost of doing this, as well as it's becoming more and more difficult to get through clinical trials. So if I could go to the next slide. So when we look at the average cost to develop a drug, it's about 2 billion plus or minus a little bit. So next slide. If you specifically look at oncology drugs, it's even more expensive. The relevance to that is when pharma are actually experiencing a patent cliff, the first area that they go to is oncology, because the demand is obviously there and the revenue possibilities are there. But if you look at it, you're seeing increasing costs to develop an oncology drug. Next slide. Oh, there's a missing one. Oh, maybe, okay. The other, there, no. Okay, the other slide was actually that it's missing. Obviously, long time to develop a drug, anywhere from 10 to 15 years. So moving on to the next slide. So one of the areas, so just to give you an idea, I think as we talk about this, we're talking about a fairly new space within life sciences. So the first drug ever to come through that was actually, the target was identified using AI and successfully brought a product into the clinic, was a partnership between Sumitomo, and I'm not going to attempt to say the next part of the Japanese pharma, and an American company. And the interesting part, that was in January 2020, that partnership developed another product, another target, and that entered into the clinic in May 13th, 2021. That was actually their third drug by 2021. So within a year, they'd actually brought 3 drugs into the clinic. And they reduced the discovery phase, which would normally take 4.5 years, to 12 months. Not surprisingly, after showing, basically this is validating that their approach is working. Then they also, of course, got partnerships with multiple pharma companies with deals to develop more drugs using that approach. So definitely developing target, getting to using AI to do target, but recognizing that you have to validate that process and make sure that it actually is accurately getting to the clinic. Now, the other part that we don't know but will play out is getting a drug target to the clinic is kind of the beginning of a very long journey that you get first in man and continue to build that out. What will have to play out and what we'll find over time is not only that they're faster at getting good targets and getting through that initial analysis process, but they're better at doing it and that they're having less failures in the clinic. Because when you look at drug development, it's very expensive to get it to the clinic. It's more expensive once you've actually get a failure. And especially as you move on in the clinical trial path, it gets more and more expensive. So time will tell whether this is actually the right approach. So next part where we saw a lot in life sciences is protein design. And this is actually a local company. And just to actually show that in January of 2022, they were able to secure investment of 43.5 million. And the lead investor was the Bears Venture Group. By the way, that was their third deal that week. So that's just showing that time it was incredibly hot if you were actually doing this. And what they're doing is actually drug discovery in using AI to examine the protein drug interactions for the development of new therapies. One of the things that I'll say in the drug development space is the companies that are successful, that are using AI and machine learning, are doing it for purpose and are very specific within drug development of how they're playing. So, you know, here in this case, they're talking about protein drug interaction. In some cases, you could be using it for stability. You could be using it for different factors. But if you're using it more broadly and are not clear on how this approach is going to benefit both, again, overcoming some challenges as a space, but also ultimately benefiting the patient, you're going to have difficulty raising money. Next slide. So when you look at this as potential areas for R&D and drug development, there are definitely some areas that are the more purple areas that are actually transformative and are going to change the way that we've actually done science in the past. Others have great potential, but it's not all of drug development that is now, embracing this. And part of it is for a few limitations. It's based on your data set and the quality of the data that you have. So certainly and I've heard this on, in some companies that have pursued an area in this using machine learning, and they could get the answer to part of their question, like which drugs are more commonly used, but they didn't necessarily the data sets were not attached to the clinical outcomes. So if you don't actually have a really strong data set, that it becomes very difficult. The other challenge is also having the right people. And I think that that's where you're seeing a lot of acquisitions by pharma, because this is not an area where it's easier for them to actually buy a company than to build out that expertise. And you're seeing a lot of changes between people it is something that to be successful, you really have to have a multidisciplinary approach. So now I'm going to switch over to healthcare. So next slide. So drivers in healthcare, this shouldn't be surprising. This is actually US data. Healthcare represents a really big cost to us. Drivers of why we have to change health comes down to obviously an aged population, an alarming rise in chronic diseases, and technology advancement. This is all leading to the need to reducing healthcare costs and enhance patient services. What I will say is that COVID really had a huge impact on the healthcare system. We obviously saw it had tremendous burdens to the healthcare system. But what you also, when this first started, I actually talked to a friend of mine who is in heads Blue Cross, their actual venture arm. And he said, for many, many years, they actually tried to get virtual health in many of the states. They knew it was actually going to reduce the costs. There wasn't a need to always have patients in place. They couldn't do anything. Overnight, all of a sudden, these companies that were in their portfolio were incredibly busy because as we saw, healthcare, now we went to virtual health. That was one of the areas where BC had a bit of an advantage because we already had the cost codes in place to allow for virtual health to happen. So the transformation wasn't as great, but there were many organizations that were set in place to actually promote innovation and promote the use of technology in healthcare that had struggled with barriers that were basically eliminated overnight. And so you saw this massive transformation that actually happened. And the hope is those barriers don't go back up over time, because really you're looking at a very different ways to deliver healthcare. Next slide. So the impacts of using this technology in healthcare include data management, scheduling, and other aspects to improve the patient experience. One of the things that has happened prior to COVID and even more important as COVID hit is the patients had a stronger voice. They were insisting on better care. They were insisting on taking control of their care, which opened up opportunities that weren't necessarily there before. And so applying this, precision medicine became a big area. And I think Views ML is going to be presenting a little bit later. There you go. And yet they definitely fall into that category. Diagnosing conditions and issues in a way that, early on, I think, I remember I was, talking to a company that was doing remote monitoring. And they actually said that through their data, they took one person's patient's records over time. And in that one patient record, they actually found diseases that had never been diagnosed, that were clear from the data. That because when you look at what physicians do, and you think about it when you're in the doctor's office, you've got 10 minutes for them to actually look at the data that either you've presented or they've actually captured and make a decision on what's going on. And so this is where no AI is not going to replace a doctor, but it's going to augment their decision making. It's going to improve their ability to make decisions, because they have to take in all of that complex data and be able to look at a pattern really and make a decision. And assisting with surgeries, I think this was ongoing prior to and is going to increase, an administrative task, because again, there's a lot of administrative tasks when you come into a hospital system. And I think Ginger Desk is presenting. So there you go, over there. Yeah, so you'd fall into this category. So next slide. So when we look at the opportunity in healthcare for artificial intelligence, machine learning, we're looking at in 2022, an industry that's worth about 15.1 billion. The prediction in 2023 to go up to 186.95 billion. And it's expected to grow at a rate of 37%. So this is really, prior to COVID, health, especially healthcare, was so far behind where fintech was. And the reason I use fintech as an example is because it's obviously heavily regulated. There's obviously concerns, and all I have to say is, what do you want released to the public? Your financial data and your health data. You don't want either of them released, right? So there are obviously privacy issues and things like that. So looking at that growth curve, there's definitely opportunities. Next slide. And when you look at, from CB Insights, where the life sciences investment areas are happening, it falls into that. If you look at the first one, care delivery and navigation tech. Now, one of the reasons that it's being driven by this is really the private healthcare system in the US that's driving this, creating efficiencies and reducing costs. And so, and the other factor is that when you look specifically at AI machine learning, it probably over 50% of those the people doing this are in North America. So you're actually seeing this slightly skewed. Obviously, monitoring, imaging, and diagnostic tech. These are all areas where machine learning and AI have an application, that they have companies that have gone out and validated that there is a value to incorporating that technology. So, just in conclusion, this area is still very much at the very beginning of its journey. However, there are a lot of different applications that really show promise in looking at using these tools to be able to enhance the efficiency of getting products to market, decreasing healthcare costs. And, there basically is a ton of opportunities. So I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion and learning more about what the other people's perspective of this, because I find it's a very exciting area to explore.
Great. Thank you very much, Lesley. Lesley and I have known each other for quite some time, but she's got an accomplished background. She knows a lot about the industry. She's been in leadership positions with various organizations, including AccelerX, which is now merged with Admari Bioinnovations, New Ventures BC, we all know them, and Coast Capital Venture Connection. So, well, she's been the past CEO of Life Sciences BC. We're really fortunate to have her head up the SFU VentureLabs. So thank you for all this information. This information will be posted on our website after this meeting. And now, let's move on to one of our most supportive partners, Nimbus Synergies. I'm going to introduce Jason Robertson. And Jason, perhaps you can introduce the rest of your crew.
Thanks very much, Zelzel. So I'll get the panelists just to come up. We don't have to have formalities here. So while they're coming up, just for those of you who don't know me, Jason Robertson, co-founder and partner at Nimbus Synergies. We are an early stage health technology investor focused primarily in BC and Canada. And it is my great privilege and pleasure to be moderating this panel on AI and healthcare. Please have a seat, get comfortable. So I guess I wanted to start, I'll try to sort of reach over. So I think Lesley did a fabulous job, I think, of setting a stage. I want to cover a couple of things just really briefly. As she alluded to at the end, why does health matter? Probably because it's one of the last significant verticals that has yet to be impacted significantly by innovation and technology. I think there's also the greatest need. I think we can all acknowledge that we strive for and we desire better care and better outcomes from our healthcare systems and lower costs. When we think about AI, I think there's certainly, again, Lesley did a great job laying out some of the theses for why AI is critical and I think a catalyst for some of the innovation that we expect to come from health in the future. One of the analogies that I really like, is this idea about thinking about, foundational or fundamental technology shifts and paradigm shifts, similar to the innovation of electricity. And I'm cribbing this and stealing this from Abby Goldfarb, one of the leading AI academics at the University of Toronto, who sort of equates it to thinking about the transformation that happened to the industrial world and factories around electricity. When electricity came in, we had steam engines that were driving factories, and you'd have one great big steam engine in the center of the factory floor, and the components that were required in the factory that had the greatest energy demands were situated next to that steam engine to drive them, and then some things kind of trailed off. And so when electrification came in and electric motors came in, obviously the first thing that we did is we replaced the steam engine with an electric engine. Or electric motor. But then over time, we fundamentally figured out that electrical motors could be smaller and they could do different things, and that we could reconfigure our factory floors to allow for greater automation and greater efficiency, leading to things like Henry Ford and the Model T and Ford, et cetera. And so I think we're at a really interesting time, and I think you're going to hear it from the panelists here, where there are things that we are doing to plug into existing solutions and using AI to do that. Alternatively, I think we need to think forward in 5 or 10 years where we're going to fundamentally reconfigure how healthcare is delivered through AI. So with that, I'm going to pause quickly and sort of say, look, when we were chatting as a panel about what to talk about, we ran for about 90 minutes. So we don't have enough time to cover all the things that we think we could do. So I think we're going to, sorry? I think we're going to try to keep it really focused and provide a few minutes at the end to address what your pressing questions are. So I think with that, I'd love to turn it over and go through and have the panelists introduce themselves one by one. And I think you're going to find from Lesley's commentary that, sorry, that's what you need. Lesley's commentary that we have a really good, diverse group of innovators here showing how they're leveraging AI in their health applications. So without greater ado, I will turn it over to Kris to introduce himself.
Thank you, Jason. I'm the head of research and development and a co-founder of Clarius Mobile Health. We manufacture and develop these portable ultrasound devices. So our vision with AI and ML is to really enable every physician to be able to use ultrasound in their practice. And we think that that goal can be achieved through the use of more education tools and automation.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us. It's also great to see some familiar faces. I miss you a lot. I think I've been just very busy with the business, and it's great to be back here today. My name is Maryam. I'm CEO and co-founder of MetaOptima. We have a platform that uses AI for helping with all dermatology, basically conditions, skin, hair and nail conditions, and we focus on skin cancer. We have over 40 algorithms in our platform, and we have over 10 million images, over 2.8 million patients in the platform that we serve today. We started building and using AI when it wasn't hot and so popular. So it was my PhD, also my postdoc in medical imaging and AI from SFU and UBC. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jason Rolfe, co-founder and CTO of Variational.ai. We have a machine learning centric approach for developing new drugs, specifically hit identification and lead optimization of selective kinase inhibitors.
That was a lot quicker than I thought it was going to be. So kudos to the panel for keeping it tight. So one of the things that again, I bridging off of what Lesley said earlier, successful execution of ML and AI, I think really requires fundamentally data. And so often lots of data. That data is leveraged, of course, as Maryam was alluding to create and train algorithms and models. And so I think one of the questions that I have for the panel is to best understand what are the biggest challenges and misconceptions about utilizing data for health venture in your particular area.
So when we founded Clarius, one of the strategies that we employed right from the beginning was to develop a whole ecosystem, not just the device itself, so that practitioners had a place to put their data. There's a lot of solutions out there, but they could be costly or not easy to use. So 7 years ago when we launched the first product, most practitioners were using a cloud system to store data. So at this point, we have literally millions of images to work with. However, even though we have access to de-identified data, there's a huge gap in understanding the context and the labeling of what's actually being stored out there. What are we looking at? What measurements have been performed? So we can pull a little bit of that through some models that we're developing now, but there's definitely a lot of manpower that goes into just curating all those images and really focusing on what sort of problems do we want to solve as we continue to develop innovations and specific ML technologies for the markets that we're serving. So a lot of data does not mean that we're going to be able to easily deploy solutions to the market.
In our case, we focused on building the ecosystem and also making sure we have vertical integration of our solution in the ecosystem for several reasons. One of them basically being to protect the data and how we collect it, the quality of data, the structure that we have. For example, you get the data from patients, someone can argue they have 2 million images coming from patients. I can guarantee less than 1% is useful because there's no label attached, data is not clean. You will find images of like unrelated things in the database, but at the end, it counts as data. So I would focus on the quality of the data and also the ecosystem that you've built. We build the ecosystem so that doctors love our system. They use it every day. We connect to pathology labs. We have the patient outcome. We know what happened to the patient. For one of the hospitals, we were talking about some of the projects we had. We migrated 25 years of data and 15 years was actually useful because previous to that, the images even are not readable. They're like color images, but they were like black and white anyway. So then you look at the quality of the data and how you build a model that doctors are going to use the system, which means basically how you focus on the adoption of the solution. And now you have the evergreen database. It's basically coming every day. Your database is growing every day. And also you will really like look at the failures, edge cases, rare cases, and the biases If you don't have the database and you've purchased only 1 million images from 2 centers, there will be so many things that won't work, and you just don't have the access to go and figure out how you can address those biases. This is an interesting topic. I would say a colorful, really area to look at all the challenges when it comes to data structure, quality, and data in ecosystem that's actually evergreen. So that was our, I believe, one of the main reasons for our success, because we implemented the solution. We had 40, to be correct, 39 algorithms in the platform, not even one diagnostic, right? It means a lot of algorithms were used to help doctors with their everyday workflow, imaging, quality check, all of that. Now they can actually see the diagnostic algorithms. We have one in the FDA process for the approval to come to life. So I would focus on data and implementation of the solution in the ecosystem so that it empowers you for addressing all the biases and the implementation challenges that you will have in the product that you are building using AI.
So in the domain of hit identification and lead optimization for the development of new drugs, the critical sort of information that's relevant is the interaction between small molecule drugs and their protein targets. There's a large amount of this data that is available from either public or commercially available sources, which you can just pay a license and get access to a large database. But the data is extremely heterogeneous in terms of the way in which the data was collected, different assays being used to address the same basic target. Also very much in terms of the quality of the data, how clean the data is. Many of the largest sources of data from things like high throughput screening are extremely noisy. They're not designed for input to machine learning algorithms. They're designed for a successive triage process done by humans. So trying to use data that was generated for one sort of workflow, pulled into a completely different sort of workflow, the machine learning workflow, it's not a natural fit. And if it's done naively, it yields models that don't yield useful predictions. So definitely curating the data, cleaning the data, attempting to find diverse sources that build up a sufficiently large data set in order to build a sufficiently rich model is absolutely essential. The size of data sets that are considered large in the cheminformatics community are off by a couple orders of magnitude from what's considered large enough in the machine learning community. So it's really essential to be as careful as possible in assembling these data sets in order to have enough statistical structure on which to be able to make non-trivial predictions.
Awesome. So I'm going to build on that, and maybe I'll start back at the other end with you, Jason, in terms of sort of asking then, and I think this is a little bit different in your context versus the other two panelists, but what I'm hearing is, of course, lots of data matters, but it's not just magnitude, it's also quality, right? So how does that impact in terms of both quantity and quality affect any sort of engagement that your venture has with a regulatory body? What are the regulators thinking about this? What are their questions? Maryam, I think you brought up something that came up in our pre-discussion in terms of biases. So how is that a critical component to how do you think about building and leveraging those data sets for your AI?
So I'll answer your direct question, but then I think I'll sort of answer the implicit question that was buried in there. The direct answer to your question in terms of regulatory bodies for drug discovery, in the end, you're going to apply for FDA approval for the drug. And that is all based upon direct experimental testing of one single compound that has moved through the entire hit discovery, lead identification, lead optimization, preclinical testing, all the way through to those first in human trials. So at that point, the machine learning that may or may not have been used to nominate that drug candidate is all sort of swept under the carpet, and they can do a direct investigation of the exact drug candidate that you're trying to push forward. The point in which one needs to convince another body of the relevance of the machine learning data is when interacting specifically with medicinal chemists in those earlier stages of the drug development. Medicinal chemists tend to be a reasonably conservative bunch. They're coming from a background in which they are operating in a very data poor environment. The number of novel compounds that a medicinal chemist produces over the course of their career maybe you're talking about a couple hundred per year just because of the time and expense associated with the synthesis and testing of each individual compound. And you only really get information about a new compound when you explicitly synthesize it and test it, which takes thousands of dollars and weeks to months for each compound. Medicinal chemists will build up intuition over the course of their career. This intuition varies drastically between medicinal chemists. There have been studies done in which you get, 10 medicinal chemists and you ask them all for their opinion about the drug likeness of a particular compound or whether they think it's going to be able to inhibit a particular target. And you will get wildly different predictions from different medicinal chemists. And this is also obviously going to be reflected in the accuracy of those predictions of any single medicinal chemist. Trying to interact with these groups of people when you're coming in with a sort of a fundamentally qualitatively different approach, you need to gain their trust and acceptance. They're going to be the gateholders. They're going to decide which compounds are actually going to be synthesized. When you're only synthesizing tens of compounds each week, there is a human gatekeeper on each of those steps. What we have found to be mostly sufficient for convincing people is showing the accuracy of the algorithm, not so much on retrospective data, an existing data set, but on prospective data. The cheminformatics and medicinal chemistry community has become extremely skeptical or careful in their investigation of retrospective data because of the difficulty of constructing good train test splits. If you just randomly split your data, you end up having very similar compounds in the test set and the train set. And as a result, a nearest neighbor predictor does extremely well. You just predict the value of that very similar compound and you do better than a human would be able to do on new compounds. In a recent interaction with a customer, we had been working with them, training on all of the data up into a certain point. At some point, we froze our models and then gave them predictions on the compounds that came out over the next couple months. And those predictions were significantly better than any of their internal models. And that really drove that process forward and gave them the confidence to continue to interact with us and begin to nominate our compounds for synthesis and testing.
Maryam, regulatory?
First, I think when we are looking at the AI and regulations approvals as investors, if I had money to bet on this domain, I wouldn't just focus on approvals and regulatory basically process. I don't think it's a success really for any business just getting the approval. I would really focus on good examples of approved products with really good market traction, because it's really easy to get FDA approval if you just engineer your system to get 98% sensitivity and the specificity doesn't really matter. But when you go to the market, you implement the solution, your business will fail just because it's overdiagnosing just to be able to get approval. So from the investor perspective, I've seen a lot of, I've been part of some application reviews for some of the investors from our investors or other groups. When I see technologies, just looking at the engineering results of approvals, I would say that's maybe 20-30% of what you need to make sure you have. Now, from the implementation perspective, if you walk to the FDA meetings, they are bombarded with so many applications in this space. We've had really, really good meetings. I love working with our FDA team. We have some senior officers from the FDA working on the problem. And it's interesting, they come with so many questions that they don't have the answers for. And this is collected from all the presentations, all the companies, all the products in the process, right? And 95% are focused on biases. You claim you have a product approved and okay, it's approved on this limited data. It's engineering. It's an engineering problem. Honestly, it's not a medical problem when it comes to FDA approvals. Okay, you had say 2 million images, you had this training, you had this skin type, you had this camera lens for your image acquisition. What happens tomorrow when the camera is updated, when you have a different skin type, when you have different age, different patient cohorts? So those are all the biases that you need to have your answer for to be able to go through those regulatory challenges. Again, it's a really interesting space. It's one of the important parts of the implementation science that you need to really be really good at it. And I think the water is getting clear. We don't have best practices, best examples in the market. You may find class 2 AI powered solutions. It's just so many predicate devices out there for radiology for different applications. I don't really count them as true AI applications in healthcare. The new ones, there are so many challenges we don't have the answers for unless we look at the real outcome data from the market, and also we monitor what's happening. One of the biases will be basically, for example, it's really technical. I'm happy to connect and talk to any of you interested in this topic. I still love my science hat better than my business hat. But like when it comes to the bias, for example, you have a company that comes and says, you know what, I have this application trained on these 100,000 images. Look, 98% accuracy on this problem. And okay, where is the image coming from? Oh, we had dermatologists as part of our team. Good job. Now you move to the real world business. Who is going to use your product? Probably not dermatologists, maybe GPs, mid-levels, other non-specialists. And then you have a different type of user who is collecting different type of data, right? Dermatologist was focused on high-risk patients. Good luck. Your GP is seeing like all of us, right? So the bias in patient cohort is really important. The bias in the images taken by different devices they have is really important. So it's a really interesting space when you look at the challenges. And I think the regulatory bodies don't have all the answers themselves. They will come to you with so many questions. And the good thing about our platform was that, for example, they asked us, oh, can your device work with iPhone cameras or device? I mean, the software AI we have for diagnostics, it's called medical device and software as medical device. Can it work with Android? And we pull the data and we show them 11 different device profiles we have in our 10 million images and showing the performance over those. Imagine we had just purchased 200,000 images from one center. Like how you can be confident that the doctor in Singapore sending images to you, to your database, will have similar patients to what you will have in Texas or in, in different parts of the region that you are focused on. So I would say just be honest with yourself as a company or as an investor or as someone who is really interested in the space and see like what are those gaps and biases and shortcomings and rare cases and worst cases that your AI will fail. And those are the ones that matter. We were talking about examples of like self-driving cars. So many people are dying every day in accidents. Nobody's making the news. And now like one self-driving car crashes a tree and it's everywhere, right? Or a car, I don't know, like crashed a dog, or there was an accident I heard recently. And that was also like making the news. So those failures will make the news. So you need to be really, really good at predicting those and communicating those, right? It's an easy thing to say to the doctor, you know what, this is difficult for AI as well. Sorry, doctor, I cannot help you. Rather than giving them a wrong diagnosis. For example, this is just one example when it comes to computer interaction. So yeah, sorry, I think took longer than what I was planning to talk.
Yeah, you make a very good point. Recently, we just launched a new version of our software with two machine learning technologies. One of them just got FDA approval a few months ago, and it was relatively simple, to be honest. It was for orthopedics and MSK to look at tendons and segment them and measure them. Nothing super novel, just a more streamlined workflow. But that took us from start to finish about 2 years to go through the data processing, the training, and then especially going through the pre-sub with the FDA, and then finally getting it approved. I think it was in October, we heard feedback from a few clinicians, hey, like I do so many procedures with your ultrasound, and you know what, I got to press this button on the iPad to make something happen, capture an image or change the depth. Can I just like speak to it, like Siri? Yeah, I guess so, So in about 3 months, we developed a machine learning model just to handle a few simple voice commands and trigger the ultrasound to do something. And this has a massive much more broader audience in terms of our user base who's going to use voice commands, which doesn't even go into the regulatory framework at all, versus something that took 2 years, which is like such a small subset of our user base. So it goes to show that you can develop AI machine learning tools. You don't need to put necessarily a ton of rigor into the diagnostic side, as long as you're helping your customers. And for us, it's getting people to use the device more efficiently and hopefully more widespread, so that they talk to their physician friends and say, hey, this is going to change your practice.
So I think sort of building on some of the things I heard here, I think if you haven't felt that way, I'm quite envious of you. I certainly feel like I will probably get replaced by ChatGPT any moment now. But I think certainly the hype and the concerns and skepticism and optimisms. I think we all feel the emotional roller coaster in terms of what we're seeing from all manners of AI. But I guess the question I sort of have, thinking about this, when you're going to market with your solution and leveraging it, I can imagine there's a lot of emotion on the other side of the table. We've sort of briefly chatted about the regulatory side, but I can imagine there's a lot of concern. So what sort of frictions are you experiencing as you bring these things to market? What sort of questions or uncertainties are you facing as you deploy your benefits? Kris, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think, again, kind of going back to the diagnostic side, like everyone would love to be able to use ultrasound and say, in our space mostly, is that a tear in the muscle? If you get into oncology, am I looking at a tumor in the liver or some other organ? I'm looking at the heart, does it have an abnormal ejection fraction? And those are all amazing problems to solve, and people are working on those. But the time and rigor that's needed to, efficiently ensure that those models are developed correctly and deployed properly and account for bias, as Maryam and Jason have been talking about, that's a big undertaking. And I think that we need to, again, take a step back and say, how can we create systems that are going to get to market faster so that people can realize the benefits of AI without waiting or having this long journey to get there? We're deploying technologies like ChatGPT, for instance, in a matter of months, and it's starting to change the world. So I think that we can try and take a similar approach in healthcare without creating additional risks, and really optimizing workflow and using things like NLP or voice or what have you, just to help people realize the benefits.
In our case, I think it comes again to that implementation that I agree with Kris. If you have a tool that doctors are using, they're enjoying it every day for so many reasons, not just for diagnostic purposes, and it's going to be easier to adopt the solution. And it's basically happening so slowly that they don't even think they are threatened because it's part of their practice. It's helping them. One of the doctors told us, oh, look at, like in 6 minutes, I could examine this high-risk patient using your product. We have a total body imaging system as well, software. And it would take me like 45 minutes, honestly, with this super expensive machine we had in the hospital that we purchased like for $250,000. Oh my God, that was such a waste of money. So this is enough. Like this is what I could put in any investor pitch when I go and say, look, this is how they are using the system. And now, oh, this is very cool. I have images similar to the image that actually I'm looking at, and it can help me with diagnosing patients. It would be very nice if you could tell me what happened to similar patients. This is like coming from the users every day, right? Like this is, you're getting the feedback. You also see that they want AI for therapeutics. They want to see what drug will help their patients, right? And this is because you have just access to that data and they know that you can help them. So I think this is really important. Again, focusing on human-computer interaction, it's really, really challenging. We are doing so many studies now. We are looking at user types, different specialties. For example, we are studying nurses, GPs, dermatologists. We have dermato-oncologists, cancer specialists, and we show the result of AI, and we want to see how this is changing their performance. It's totally variable. And we actually could show that regular derms could be better than cancer specialists if they were just looking at the analysis. But this is helping the doctor to be better rather than replacing them. So I think like as a company, as a partner with these health systems, you show in practice that you're part of their team, you're helping them with saving costs, you're listening to them, you're not just like launching overnight like ChatGPT and say, oh, doctor, bye. Like we learned from you and now we're going to replace you. And I don't think healthcare is something that you can do that easily. I wouldn't trust any AI system to diagnose or treat my mother today, right? And I'm a scientist. My PhD was in medical imaging. I know all the gaps, but I will go to a doctor who uses the best system to look at similar cases and to predict what will work for my mother, right? Because we have so many examples. And yeah, I think when it comes to the forces against adoption, we just need to have that human-computer interaction studied very well. And also there was a study I can talk forever about AI. I'm so excited about like all the possibilities. But one study, my favorite study, if you want to look at dermatology and AI and the Google publications, it was published in Nature. It was showing that all users, no matter what is their specialty, could benefit from AI and should listen to AI if they are not confident 5 out of 5. If they are even confident 4 out of 5, they should listen to AI. If they are confident 5 out of 5, even if it's a nurse, someone not a specialist, confident this is psoriasis, they should not go to AI. It will decrease their accuracy. This was a very simple point, but actually we adopted that in our implementation, our studies, and we see that every day. So it's not going to be basically a failure for an AI system to tell you, oh, this is a marker point or it's a mole. If you are 100% this is a marker point and you give it to AI, that doesn't matter. You're confident. You should not ask AI about that. AI can help you for difficult cases.
So our end users are in the end medicinal chemists. So the interaction there is a little bit different. Building confidence is effectively done via the approaches that I talked about a little before. Something that's interesting in this interaction is, at least at present, the systems are not sufficiently accurate that they'll be able to say, here are 10 compounds, synthesize these 10 compounds next. In particular, if you look at the published literature on ML for drug discovery algorithms, if you read the methodology carefully, many of these systems are using what they call a generative AI system to produce 10,000 molecules. And then they have trained medicinal chemists go through this list of 10,000 and select 20 from the list. And then they'll actually test those 20 and say, hey, we found 3 reasonable hits out of these 20 from the 10,000 produced by the AI system. Wonderful success, AI discovered molecule, we're going to be able to revolutionize everything, costs will go down by a factor of 10, everything will take months instead of years. And this is largely bogus. You're basically using some relatively simple computer algorithms in order to define a virtual screening library to which you are then applying massive amounts of human expertise. The point at which you really gain traction, the point at which you really begin to impress the user base and induce them to use your predictions more than their own insight is when you're able to select a list of 100, and when you actually synthesize those 100, you get 10 or 20 hits out of those. So it's the systems that are currently in use by most of the companies that are practicing this technique. They are doing their best to make it sound as if they have impressive results. They're certainly making incremental progress towards that end success, but the systems are not there yet.
So I think we just have a few minutes left. So maybe a question or two that we can have our esteemed panelists answer, something that's burning a hole in your mind. So if I can repeat the question for those who are online, I think it's effectively, how does, maybe infrastructure like graphic cards, compute power, et cetera, affect your business? If that's okay. Who wants to take that? All right.
So for any deep learning algorithm that you're training yourself, you basically need NVIDIA GPUs. They have a stranglehold on the market. They are the only architecture that's able to efficiently and broadly accelerate the sort of deep learning algorithms that everybody uses. GPUs are extremely difficult to get your hands on. Whenever we want to expand our cluster, it will be a many multi-month lead time in order to get the GPUs that we need. Everything else is, there obviously were supply chain issues throughout COVID, but getting your hands on A40s or A100s, or God forbid the H series cards, they're extremely difficult. People talk about cloud compute. If you try to get access to GPU instances on GCP or AWS, there's tons of CPU resources available. Getting your hands on 1,000 GPUs to use for a couple of days is basically impossible, or at least we aren't paying enough money to get them. And it really is just NVIDIA. The AMD cards are not capable of supporting the workflows that people need. The special purpose architectures that are in development are not really general purpose enough yet that they would be what you want to use for exploratory work. So it's definitely a problem. The other thing that kills us is the consumer grade cards are many times more cost efficient than the server grade cards. It is illegal to run a consumer grade card in a data center, even if it's your own data center. So you end up taking a big cost hit there.
So notwithstanding its massive run up and 50% raise, NVIDIA maybe is a buy on your portfolio list. Yeah, I'm not going to jump on that bandwagon. Anyways, Delzell. Oh, one more. Okay, one more question. Who's jumping at the bit?
Sure, yeah, I guess the other question is, so I see that as a limitation for small companies like yours, as we consider investing or backing companies, and we consider that companies with bigger pockets and deeper pockets will have the advantage over companies like yours. What would you say to something like that?
I think you're always looking at some of the parts, sensors, camera lenses, GPU cards, those are one of the forces. There's so many other forces. Companies like us, they are more economy. We are really good at developing tools. We are really good at selling to Australian cancer centers from our small company. No one could basically find about us 2015 when we launched, but we actually, for example, in this conference, we sold out our devices to all these big companies. I think one of those forces is actually your partnerships, your strategy. When our Series A investors came to us, we had the same day deal. They fly from Australia, meet us from 9 to 5 p.m. And then we had the deal offer for twice as what we were looking for. And in my conversation with our lead investor, Scott Farquhar from Atlassian, he told me, Maryam, what actually attracted me to you guys, it was like how big you were thinking. When I asked you who was going to acquire you, you were like, I think the future is with like maybe Google, Apple, Samsung, and I've already had meetings with executives, and this is going to be like a consumer play in dermatology and AI, but this is like 10 years from now. And this is the only way you can make $1 billion company in this space. And these are like a couple of sentences. And I was just thinking about that, like, seriously, it wasn't to convince this investor about like what I think, right? So those are some of the parts, right? Like our investors, we are so thankful for all the support we've had from our investors. Those are one of those parts. Jason, Laura, the Nimbus team, they have been amazing. And so my point is, it's not like just these big companies. Okay, who they're investing on, right? Look at the venture arms. I can name all of the pharma companies I've had meetings with, and we've decided to move on, or they have decided not to invest on. So, I mean, it's not just like, oh, small companies won't succeed and you need to be a big one to succeed. I don't think that's the case. Investors are one of the parts and they really matter. And I think it's about the strategy, execution. I would focus on execution. I would focus on execution, and also how good you are at surviving. That really matters.
So I think with that, we will wrap it up. I want to give my great thanks and hopefully the audience as well for your time and your insights. Invaluable. A better esteemed panel in healthcare and AI you cannot have. So thank you very much for making the time.
All right, thank you very much, Jason and Maryam and Kris. That was a really valuable information that you provided for us. Geez, I didn't think that you could. I think you rival Lesley Esford's information as well. As I said, all of this is being recorded and it will be on our website, so you can take a look.